Alright, in this lesson, as we go along with lesson 2, this is called data entry part 2, and you guys, it's very similar to what we had done in data entry 1. So if you want to, you can add these features to your data entry 1 project, save a little time. But if you feel like you need some practice, go ahead and make this form. Let me show you what it does. This time I've broken up the name into two separate text boxes so I can show you something different. And so if I pipe in Carl Lee here and I hit print, this time it's going to take thanks for shopping and say Carl Lee. Take Carl, add a space, and put his last name into the label like we did before. But last time I only used the first name. And then the other things that I want to show you are that if you hold down the Alt key, you'll notice these guys have a little underscore underneath those letters like that. If I do Alt P, that will simulate clicking the print button. If I do Alt C, it simulates the clear, and if I do Alt Q, it will kill it. So in this application, what I'd like to do, I'm going to show you how I built this. I'm going to show you the things on the code that are different, but I'm not going to build it step by step because I think by now you should be able to do this. This text box is called TXT first. This one's TXT last. Remember, these guys you don't rename, but you notice here I changed the size of the font and I made it blue just to be different. The buttons are BTN print, BTN clear, and BTN quit. And this one is LBL receipt, kind of like before. So if you want to build this app, stop the video now, put all those controls on there, and then start the video again, and you can see the coding. So I'm going to show you the coding plus some new features here. Okay. Now, when they click on the print button, you're going to need an event handler. So obviously, we have to make room for that. And over here is what I wanted to show you. When you're doing concatenation with two different variables or two different text boxes, it's kind of the same thing as what we did in the first time, except I'm going to add some stuff to it. Notice here when they click print, in the label lblreceipt.text is going to be equal to thanks for shopping, just like I did before, with a space, and then I'm going to add or concatenate what was in the first text box. But I also want his last name or her last name, and I want a space in between. So I'm going to add another little plus, then I'm going to put a quotation mark and then a space. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a space in here, and then another quotation mark, and then keep going. Do a space and then put a plus sign, and you type in txt_last.text, and in both of these cases we're using the trim method to get rid of any blanks. Okay, so that should say thanks for shopping, Bob Miller, Karen Hope, whatever they put in. If they just type in junk, and obviously it'll type in junk. Okay, now let's take a look as a reminder back at the clear button so we make sure we understand how to do that. Before we only had one text box, well now we have two. So we're going to clear the first text box, txt_first.clear, txt_last.clear. Then we're going to click on the label and clear the label. And remember, in the label you don't have a clear method. You have to do lblreceipt.text equals the two double quotes. And finally we put our blinking cursor back in there like we did before, txt_first.focus. In the event handler for the quit button, it's the same as we did in the other two projects. It just say this.close. So all those things are the same, but I want to add some features. And these features that I'm going to have you add typically are things that you would do at the very end of your application when you're all done. So you're not going to be messing with it anymore and you're pretty happy with it. And these are just like comfort features in a way. They help the people using your app interact with it easier, partly with the keyboard, and then partly we're going to give it some little help. So up at the top of the code, what I want you to get in the habit of doing, I want you to come up here and make a comment, and in C# for a block comment you can do a / and an asterisk, and then come down here and do an asterisk and a /, just an opposite. And in between I want you to put your name of your project, put your name on it when you built it. And I made a little note for myself to remind you, to tell you what we're going to do here. I showed you the string concatenation, so we did first and last name. I want to show you something called default keys, cancel keys, shortcut keys, tab order, tooltips, and then finally I want to talk to you very briefly about all these statements here that Visual Studio puts in. These are called using statements. I just want to show you something about that and something new in 2015 that you can take advantage of if you want to. So let's look at the first thing. The first one was a default key. Now here's what I want to have happen. When the program is running, I would like the print button to be the default key, and what that means is it will have a little border around it like this clear button does at the moment. We don't want that. And what happens is when the print button has the focus or becomes a default key, that means all I have to do after I type in the names, I just hit enter. I don't have to go up there and mess with the mouse, and it's very, very handy. While we're doing that, we're going to put in what's called a cancel key, so when I hit escape on the keyboard, just like I did, it cancels your application. Now these two things that I'm going to show you don't do anything extra tricky. They don't require any coding. What they do is they just go in and run the code that's associated with the print button or the quit button. So the escape button goes in and runs all the code that's connected to this guy, and the print button, when you do the enter key, it goes ahead and runs the code associated with this one. Okay, and then the shortcut keys are used with the Alt key. So you hold the Alt key down with your thumb on the keyboard, do a P that represents clicking the P, Alt C does that guy, and Alt Q does that. So those are two different things. Let's do what I call the default button first. Now make a note for yourself, working with forms, and the first thing is set a default button and a cancel button. This is a property. These two things are properties of the form. They're not part of the button, and that's where students get messed up. So you want to click once somewhere on the form. Okay, don't double click it. Push F4. Make sure that your form is selected up here in the properties window. Mine's called FRM main. You're looking for something called the accept button, and it's right there. I call it the default button because that's what it has been called for many, many years, but it's called the accept button. Notice none of them is set right now, but if you click this, Visual Studio knows all the buttons that you have on your form. So I'm going to say I want BTN print to be my accept button, and you'll see how that works in just a minute. While we're at it, go down here and set the cancel button to BTN quit. So when they hit the escape key, it will execute any code that we have associated with this guy, and when they hit the enter key, it will execute any code that's associated with the print one. Okay, so let's run it just for the heck of it. And I have messed this up totally. I'm sorry, because of the way I did the tab order. Let me fix it. Okay, I had to go in and fix a tab order on this thing. You'll notice now when I type in something, Glenn Wilson or something, instead of clicking the print button with the mouse, I can just simply hit the enter key, because you'll notice that the print button has a little blue border around it. That means it has the focus. As I hit the tab key, you will notice that the focus changes from these different controls. See that? Now it's in the text box, now it's in the other text box. It never goes to the label. Labels don't ever get the focus. Okay? But you can set this tab order, I'll show you that in a minute, but what I wanted to point out in this part is all I have to do is hit enter, and that will do the same thing as the as hitting the print button with the mouse. If I want to quit, because we did the cancel button, I can now hit the escape key on the keyboard, and that goes in and runs the code for the quit button right here. Okay, so it doesn't add any more coding. You don't have to do any typing, nothing. It just does it behind the scenes for you, and it goes in and associates those keyboard buttons with these different sections of code. That's all it is doing. Okay, now the shortcut keys are kind of cool because they give you a chance to do the Alt P, Alt C, and Alt Q. When you're doing the shortcut keys, a couple pieces of advice. First of all, you want to look at all your buttons and make sure you don't have two buttons starting with the same letter. Most people are used to doing these with the first letter. If you wanted to, if I called this exit, for example, it's very common to make the X in exit be your shortcut key. So first of all, you just pick a shortcut key. You go into the property of the first button. Now this is a property of the button, not the form. Go down to the text property where you typed in print, in this case, and look what I did. I put a little ampersand right in front of the P. Now the ampersand is going to tell Visual Studio, make that a shortcut key. If I wanted the R, to be the shortcut key, I would type P and then ~R. If I wanted the T to be the shortcut key, you put the ampersand in front of the T. Do the same thing for the next button. Ampersand and then clear, and then this one would be ampersand and Q. And that's what allows me to run stuff by just hitting Alt P, Alt C, and Alt Q. Okay, and people that do data entry all day will love you for these little accoutrements. These little things make a big difference in their life, because messing around with the mouse all day not only gives you carpal tunnel, it wears you out, and you can't work as fast and efficiently. Okay, now let's go back to my list. Shortcut keys. Now I want to show you tab order and then tooltips and then the using statements. Now the tab order is simply this. As you start off with your tab starting off in the first control that you want, I chose this text box. As I hit the tab key, it goes here, then it goes here, then it goes the next one, goes this one, and it goes around a circle. Okay, just like that. When you're building your app, these are usually not in the right order that you want, because Visual Studio sets up your tab order based on which control you put on your form first, and then second, and third, and so forth. So you want to set it, but you don't want to mess with this until you're all done. Two ways to do this. Let's say I want this to be the first object on the form that gets the focus, and I want the blinking cursor there. That's easy to do. You go into the property of the first text box, and you want to go down to tab index. You see that right there? Now, make a note to yourself, when you're setting the tab order, the first control that you want to have the focus on starts with 0. All these things number from 0. And then, so you set it to 0. You go to the next one, you set its tab index to 1. I went to this button, I set it to 2, and so forth. This one's 3 and that one's 4, and starts all over. The labels, even though they show a tab index, they never get the focus, so I'm not sure why they even bother with that. There must be a reason, but I've never ever figured it out, and so just don't worry about what it says for any of your labels. This thing, see, they have numbers, but they're nonsensical. They never do anything. Now there's a new way to do this if you want. If you'll click on your first item, and you have to click on one of these controls, and go to the view menu, you'll see an item called tab order, and they now have this little graphical thing that you can use. And let's say that the first one was a 7. If I was to hover over it with the mouse and click it, it would change it to a 0. I go to this one, it makes it 1. I go to this one, 2, 3, 4, and it knows what you want to do because it's based on the one before that. If it gets all messed up, I usually just go in and I turn the tab order off and start over again. Sometimes this is faster, sometimes doing it the old-fashioned way is better. And again, ignore all these ones that are in here with the labels because they don't mean anything. You can even see there's one for 4 and one for 4. I don't know why they even show them, but they do. All right, then when you're done, turn it off by doing tab order. One quick note, if you click on the form and go to view, you won't, well, there it is there, but you have to click on the form. You can't be in the code window or something like that, or it won't show up for you. Okay, so I come back up in here, whoop, there it is, and I just click that off, then they all go away. All right, so that's tab order. Now the other one that's very cool is tooltip. Now a tooltip, you've seen these, you probably didn't know what they were called. I can, when I take the mouse, when I hover over this text box, I want it to say, please enter your first name. And when they hover over the button, let's say click me to go home or something, they're just little balloons that pop up and give your user a little hint as to what they're supposed to do. So let me show you how to add tooltips. In order to do that, you have to go into the toolbox now, and under the common controls or all controls for Windows, I just use the common right now, you'll see a tooltip control. Double click it, and it will put in a tooltip component. You see down here at the bottom of the screen, this window that is sitting here now, that's called a component tray. And it doesn't look like it, but it's part of Windows. And as you build database apps and other things, you'll find all kinds of different components that will end up down here. And they are attached to the form, even though they're in this special place. So once you have added the tooltip control, I want to show you what happens. If I click on the first text box, now I have a new property that I didn't have before called Tooltip on Tooltip 1. Now it says Tooltip 1 because I didn't rename it, and I don't see any reason for you to rename it. But what you can do is you can click on this and you can type in what your tooltip is, or you can just do it right here in this box. So I say type in your first name. Now these things are obvious on this particular app, but they may not be so obvious on other apps. On the clear button now we have a tooltip on Tooltip 1. I say click me to go home, my favorite button, going home. Okay, so if we put that on there and I start this, watch what happens. As I put Mr. Mouse over this on the quit button or on the text box, you should see a tooltip. So that says type in your first name. Can you see that? And then on this one, it will come up and it should say, like, click me to go home. I'm not sure why it's not showing up, but it's not showing up. We'll check it real fast. Tooltip, oh, I didn't put it in there right, I guess. Click me to go home. I shouldn't have messed up my favorite thing. I must have erased it when I clicked. Okay, now when you hover over this, it says click me to go home. You can set what this looks like, and you can set how long it stays on screen. See how it stayed there for a little while and then goes away? If you will click on the tooltip over here one time, you'll see it has its own set of properties. And look, is balloon, I can change that to true, and then it'll come up as a balloon, which looks nice. You can change the foreground and background color. You can change the delays for how long it's on screen. So if you did this now and I did this, it's going to come up as one of those, which is a little more modern looking than something else. Okay, so again, customers really like this. I wouldn't bother on this app because it's so obvious what we're doing, but there are many apps where you can say, particularly on a website, you say, hey, make sure you add something to the cart before you check out, something like that. Okay, you do something friendly with them. All right, so now let me go back to my list. Okay, we've looked at all these things. Now the last thing I want to talk about is something called using statements, and those are right here. Now these are things that Visual Studio puts in here, and I explained once, but let me go over this again. When you create an application in C#, Microsoft decided they're going to give us a few features to get us started. And all these features that they have, there's 30,000 of them at least on your computer. They're on your hard drive when you install Windows, and when you install Visual Studio, you get even more. And they're organized in what are called namespaces. Now, you remember seeing namespace down here when we looked at right here when we looked at this project. The project's in its old namespace. It's just like a special place so that it doesn't get confused with another project that might have the same name. That's all it is. But these namespaces in C# start with a using statement. So when you want to include a feature or you want to include some kind of a capability that isn't with you, didn't come with your project, then you can just add one. So for example, if I wanted to read and write to the hard drive, I'm going to put in using, and notice that IntelliSense came up, system dot, and then if I choose I/O, which stands for input output, now I have just added all the capability to read and write data from the hard drive. But Microsoft, I guess, figured that not a lot of people do that, and so they don't include that. This one here I want you to take note of, the System Windows Forms namespace, and you can think of them as files and folders. That's what they look like. The System Windows Forms namespace where all of our controls are in the toolbox, where the message box is, and all the capabilities to create Windows Forms. So obviously we need that one. We aren't using anything with special text drawing. We're not using data from a database. I'm not using any of the components that are in here, and so I could just go through and erase them. And that's probably a good idea because there's no use having them in there if you're not going to use them. Now, one thing that I saw in Windows 15 that is new is this. When you're clicking over here with these guys, there's a little balloon that comes up here. It's got its own little pop-up tooltip, and it says quick actions. And look what this does. If you click this, you can say remove unnecessary usings, and it gives you this little chart, and it says, look, all these ones in red, you ain't using. You might as well whack them. Okay, just click on it and it whacks them. Okay. Again, there's no use having anything in your app that you don't absolutely need. You don't need to add more potential problems for yourself. So that is a very nice little feature that only shows up in Visual Studio 15. So that's something I wanted to show you. In Visual Basic, we use the word imports, but in C#, C++, we use the word using. Those are namespaces. Those are part of what are called the .NET Framework, which is Microsoft's model for allowing us to create applications in different languages for different devices. And as we go along through the semester, I will give you some lectures and show you some slides on what all that stuff is, but you should know that, and they talk about it in your Murit book as well. Okay, so again, this is just a real simple application, but at least I wanted to do it because I wanted to show you all these different features, which are very cool, and the people using your app will really appreciate it. All right? All right, see you next time.